So, all right, we are recording live. We've got author James Rosone doing a Q&A. We've got our friend James Byrne from Queensland, Australia. We got James Belt coming to us from Oklahoma. We got Gary Bridges coming to us from Tampa, Florida area. So, how are you all doing today?
Pretty good. Glad to be here.
Great.
Yeah, good.
So, let's get going with some of these questions that I know you all are burning. So since James Byrne's been here the longest, coming to us from the farthest location, let's start with you, James. What question do you have? And then we'll answer one of yours, and we'll go to the next James, and we'll go to Gary. We're just kind of going around in a circle like that. So we're trying to get through as many of them as we can for you guys.
Remember just recently you announced that you would be doing some standalone novels like North Korea, Venezuela. You also mentioned a alternate history Gulf War.
Yeah.
How's that? What is the status of that?
Yeah, good question. So I'm still trying to figure out the alternate history one for the Gulf War. I think that would be pretty neat. I think me and Gary are actually looking at possibly trying to do that together. Gary was actually a battalion commander in the 101st Airborne in the Gulf War. So he has a lot of the maps and the information and the contacts and really knows a lot of detail about it. And so we were looking at doing a series on that where I would probably write a little bit more of like the Iraqi perspective, and Gary would write a bit more of the American perspective of that war, and try and do that. So we haven't set a date to start work on it yet. Gary's got to finish, he's got book 2 coming out, and then he's got to finish book 3 for his series, and then I'm working on trying to get at least the first 3 books of the sci-fi series done. Because Retribution's done, Miranda's editing it, but I've got to get the other 3 books for the next series done, so that way I have about a 3-month gap that I can use then to work on another series. Because it takes me about, well, I should say this, before my kids were quarantined with me, I could knock out a 550 to 600 page book in probably about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. With them quarantined, however, that's cut that time in half, or doubled it, because I got screaming kids all the time now. I don't have 8 hours a day of dedicated writing time. But the other question on the Venezuela one and the North Korea one, I don't know. I'm still working on trying to get those. I'm hoping that maybe I could start one of them towards the end of the year. I may even try and start the outline for book 1 over the summer, possibly. I think what I want to do is the Venezuela one first, and it may end up turning into a 3-book series instead of a 1-book, because what I want to look is I want to integrate in Cuba into Venezuela, because they're kind of hand in hand. So I think it really needs to be that way. And what a lot of people don't realize is Venezuela has the largest oil deposits in the world. Not just largest oil deposit, it has the best oil quality in the world. It also has some of the best untapped rare earth minerals, that haven't been mined yet. And so there's a lot of interest on the part of the Chinese and the Russians in trying to secure those minerals. So I think there could be a good play for, the Belt Road Initiative, where the Chinese come in, try to take things over, and the United States says, hey, we still have this thing called the Monroe Doctrine, where no superpower is going to be in our sphere of influence, and boots them out. So I don't know, maybe we will try to get to that, I can tell you that. So let's see, we got James Belt. What's your question you have?
I'd like to know something about your writing process, and what I mean by that is some authors will write very organically. In other words, they may have an ending sort of in mind. They kind of know where they want to go. Maybe not very many details about it, but they know where they want to land the book by the last page.
Yeah.
And they have the beginning, an opening scene in mind that draws the reader in and provides some excitement or some intrigue, but they have no idea what's in between all of that. And they just write from event to event to event. A lot of other authors will research ferociously and plot it all out and chart it on whiteboards in their office. How do you come up with your books? How do you get from the first page to the last page?
So I'm what they call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants because I literally sit in my lazy boy chair over there with my headphones on, and I don't have a big whiteboard like that. What I do try to do is come up with the scenario that we're going to write about. And then I have an end state of what I want it to look like, just like what you were saying. And then I have the opening scenes that we try to create. So what I'll do though is I'll take a Word doc, and I'll go chapter 1. What are the 3 main things we want to talk about in this chapter to move the story along? And then go to chapter 2, and what are the 2 or 3 main things for that chapter? And then we move all the way through until I think I've reached the end. Then it's a matter of saying, okay, now we've got chapter 1. Here are the 2 or 3 main things we want to talk about. How do we want to talk about these things? And then start filling it in. Then once that's filled in, then I look and say, okay, does chapter 2 still make sense after what I just wrote? Or do I need to change chapter 2 around and move something else in its place or move it down further? And oftentimes I find I end up just moving it further and adding a few more chapters to fill in and figure things out better. Or I'll get halfway through the book and I'll look at what's left and go, nope, none of that's going to work anymore, and I'll rechange all of that. But I think when you make a very structured process, it can be helpful to people who think like that. But the challenge is when you do that is it also constrains you to a box. It puts you in a box of what you've got to do. And I think that something like that is very helpful if you're working with a bunch of co-authors or a ghostwriter. But if you're an independent writer yourself and you're wanting to flow with the story, because the story is going to take a life of its own and progress, you need to have some flexibility. But you want to still have an outline, or at least a brief outline. My outline's only sometimes 2 or 3 sentences in each chapter segment, but it's still a guide. It still tells me what scene to write. You know, like, okay, we need to have this capture scene take place in Boston. Okay, well, that tells me I need to write a capture scene in Boston. Now, is it going to be 3 pages or is it going to be 20 pages? Well, that depends on how detailed we want the story to be and how intricate that is and how many characters are going to be involved with it. But that's still an outline. So that's kind of how I go about doing it. So Gary, are you able to hear us yet? All right, well, he's still having technical problems. So we'll go back to our Queensland person here.
It's the James show.
It's the James. So we'll call you James 2 and James Byrne is James 1. So we'll go back to James 1. What questions have you got again?
If you were
it's okay if you don't have one.
What if you would pick like the most out of the ordinary nation to be on the Allied side,
Yeah.
like something that would be like whoa, I didn't see that coming. Like, what nation would you pick?
I've actually thought about doing that. Actually, a series. I actually thought about doing one where we have the United States and Russia actually work together, or NATO and Russia actually come together to deal with the renegade China. Because ironically, I think the U.S. foreign policy has been a little backwards the last 15 years, last 20 years. I don't think we should be viewing Russia as an adversary. I think they are an adversary because we've made them an adversary. I think that we pushed them into that adversarial box, and so we've left them no room. I think the better approach would have been to take Russia and embrace them, to make them more like us, or to help bring them into the fold, so to speak, because that's what we've done with NATO. And the fact remains that China is the ultimate adversary. They are the global superpower that's trying to supplant Western democracy in the United States. And that includes Russia. The Russians have their own enormous problems with the Chinese. They have Siberia that they're trying to protect. They have all the natural minerals and resources and oil in Western Siberia and in their west coast that the Chinese have their eyes on. The Chinese have been, flooding millions and millions of immigrants across into their border to create these ethno-Chinese states inside of Siberia and inside of Russia. So the Russians have an enormous challenge with China. So does the United States, so does NATO and the rest of Europe. So why are we at loggerheads constantly and an adversarial relationship when the fact is we should be, aligning ourselves together to counter what is by far a much greater threat in dealing with Russia. So I think that there is going to be a series down the road where we see NATO, Russia integrating into NATO or some sort of global alliance like that, and then we see the conflict take place between all of that and the Chinese.
It's like, it kind of reminds me of that Tom Clancy novel, The Bear and the Dragon.
Yes, it
From
does.
the Jack Ryan series.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I mean, I don't understand. When I worked at NATO, I was at U.S. European Command for 3.5 years, and so we were NATO's intelligence arm, and we ran all of the European operations over there. It was frustrating because I didn't understand why we had to maintain an adversarial relationship with Russia when we had at that time, because we were dealing with the Islamic extremist threat, a very real threat in Russia and in Southern Europe and in Eurasia with Islamic extremists. Russia was on our side in that respect. So why were we not working in closer relationship with them to deal with the separatists, Islamic separatist groups in Dagestan and Chechnya in those areas? Because those were hotbeds of terrorism that were spreading down into the Middle East. They were spreading into Iraq and Afghanistan, causing us further problems. And we could have used that as an opportunity to mend some old bridges there and create some new relationships and friendships, and maybe help to thaw this adversarial relationship a bit. Because the real threat isn't Russia. The real threat is more to deal with China. Yeah. So we'll see, but that would definitely be a cool one to throw in, I think, because everyone's always war against Russia. Well, what if Russia is the ally? I think that's a really unique possibility and an interesting opportunity. So maybe we'll make a timeline for that in 2030s and have that kind of happen. Could be slick. So James, too, what's your question?
So out of the 4 million books that you've written, what out of all of those, what particular scene is closest to you and why?
Oh, man. Closest to me. Well, that would probably be my book, Interview with a Terrorist, because that was my whole life story for, 18 months. I mean, that was my job.
Okay, be more specific. What scene out of that book actually resonates with you the most?
Oh, man, I've got 4 in particular that really, really stick with me a lot. I got the one where the capture unit caught this 15-year-old kid, placing an IED on the side of the road. They didn't detonate it. The bad guys didn't detonate it. So we caught the kid and brought him in for interrogation. And we knew who he was. We knew who his family was. We were after his family. They were our top guys. And we did a really harsh interrogation on this kid because we could only detain him for a certain number of days because of his age. So we knew we had very limited time to get what we could get from him. So we used a very harsh interrogation, cigars, blowing smoke, lots of yelling and screaming, throwing chairs and banging tables, and just really, nothing we're not allowed to do, but that's tough to do to a 15-year-old. And he eventually gave up the information. I said, look, you can either tell us the information and we can go get them at night and they'll live, because I want to interrogate live people, not dead people, or you can let us continue to hunt and find them and we'll kill them. And so he gave up the location, and throughout the whole course of the interrogation, the thing I forgot is when a unit goes to breach a door, you need to ask as the interrogator a lot of details about the compound, about the windows, about the doors, about the gates, things like that, so they know what they're doing when they approach. Does the doors open in or out? You need to know that, because you need to know, are you hooking a chain up to the door and then attaching that to the Humvee and ripping it off? Or are you using a battering ram to punch it in? You need to know if there's locks on the tops and bottoms of the door, because if there are, then the breacher's got to have that shotgun with the slugs to be able to punch those out so the door can bust in. And I forgot to ask a couple of those questions, mostly the ones that the locking on the top piece. And so, you know, a firefight ensued. One of our guys got his arm shot off. Another guy got wounded. The mission unit, the mission commander at the time said, "Screw it." They called in a gunship, and a gunship fired a couple rockets and flattened the place, you know, and took out the 3 guys that we were after. Problem is, it also took out the kid's grandma, his mom, and his little brothers and sisters. And so, you know, all those had to be pulled from the wreckage and take pictures taken. They give all the pictures over to me, and then I have to take the pictures back to this into this interrogation. And I got to tell this kid, have him PID them all. You know, say, you know, find out, did we get them? You know, that was kind of rough. That was kind of that kind of sucked because.
So then a follow-up question: did you find for that particular book, the writing process helped you cope with that better?
Yes.
That, you know, I know you're not this cruel, heartless bastard. You know, you have feelings, you have emotions, you have a conscience, you do what you need to do. But so how did that help you in writing that out?
Well, you know, part of the problem is with PTSD is people don't talk about things that keep them built up inside. And the more you build it up inside, the more it manifests in negative and bad behavior, whether it's emotional outbursts, whether it's anger or drinking or abusive relationships or addictions, things like that. So you have to be able to get that out. And if you can't get that out through talk therapy or through talking, then you need to find another outlet. And writing has actually been a very good outlet because there's no one to interrupt you. There's no one to stop you. There's no one to interrupt what's going on in your mind. It's just you just spitting it out. So for me, Interview with a Terrorist was me just writing out my cases and the things that bugged me. Some of the stuff that we accomplished was really great. You know, we stopped a lot of terrorist attacks. We stopped a lot of people from getting killed and hurt. We saved a lot of lives, but we killed an awful lot of people in the process of doing that. And that does weigh on you a bit too. And it's some of the stories you have to hear. I mean, you got to be buddies with some of these horrible, horrible human beings to get them to give up the goods on their comrades. Because at the end of the day, you know, our job is to either capture or kill these terrorists. And we will do one or the other. If we can take them alive so we can interrogate them and find out who's next on the chain, we will do that every day. If those buggers won't surrender, then we're going to put them in the dirt. And you know, your job as an interrogator when you get these people is to find information. You're human intelligence collectors. You can't. Cell phones is great. Cell interceptors, text messages, and emails is great. You can do a lot of tracking with that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to sit down and talk one-on-one with someone and find out who's the next leader in the organization. Where are the weapons being smuggled in from? Where are they being stored? How are the weapons coming across Iran or across from Syria? Where are the rat lines? Who's funding all of this? How is that money coming in from Europe to Iraq? You know, you got to find that stuff, and you're only going to find that from actually interrogating prisoners that you capture. So you hear a lot of awful, awful stuff. And for me, writing was very good therapy to be able to kind of get rid of some of that. But, you know, in a way, it's also helped with creating our books because it's allowed us to integrate some very realism stuff to it. Like one case I have in there, and this was just awesome, and I've written about this same type of scenario in many of our books. So we had a guy who was an HBI. He was one of the head guys making these car bombs in Baghdad, the northern Baghdad belt. And so we've been after this bugger for a while, and he started chatting on a cell phone, and we happened to have that number from a previous interrogation. We ripped the cell phone, and we had the information. So a drone's up there, picks up the cell phone. They start zeroing in on where the cell phone is. They track it to a car that's driving through Baghdad. We're like, holy crap, this is him. He's on the phone right freaking now. So the next unit that was on task, I think, was a Delta team. And they got up in the air, because they'll usually leave like a SEAL or a Delta team or a Green Beret team. It depends. It's like a CGSO, Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force. They have a couple RPCs around. And so usually they always have a specific unit that's on standby with a helicopter ready to go at the flick of a wrist when a mission like this happens. So I think they were the ones on deck, and they're off, and there's a drone watching it, so you can see the drone feed. Another helicopter comes in, and he's videoing it, and then this Black Hawk comes flying in, and this dude just hangs out of the side of this helicopter from a strap with a big old long gun, plucks a couple rounds in the hood of this car stops, helicopter comes hovering down, and he's now hovering down right right over this traffic circle area. These 3 ropes come down, 3 dudes just jump out of this helicopter, jump down 50 feet or so, and they're bolting for this car. Rifles up, they're bolting to the car, bashing the side window. They grab the dude, yanked him out of the car, threw him on the ground, put a hood over his head, zip tied his hand, threw him on his shoulders. And at this point, there's a couple gunships that have kind of hovered in the area now. And then this Black Hawk just lands in the middle of this traffic circle. Everyone's going, what the hell's going on? These 3 dudes with their guy over his shoulder run, throw him in the helicopter, and he's gone. And then the gunships leave and everyone's gone. And the whole thing takes less than a couple minutes. And that was the most fantastical thing I'd ever seen. And then they bring this guy to me. He sits down in front of me, and we pull the hood off him, and he's just like totally bewildered. And I'm like, Mohammed so-and-so, it is really good to finally meet you. And he's like, Woolamar, which is, I swear to God, I don't know anything. I'm just like, yeah, right, dude. We don't do this for anyone. So that was pretty neat to see that kind of stuff. But we were able to write that level of detail into the book because we've done it, we've seen it. That's awesome,
So it looks like Gary was he's able to see us and hear us, but he can't engage. So he fired off a question, and if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and read one of his questions via the chat.
Yep.
He says, how do you select your characters? How do you keep them straight? Do you lay them out on a spreadsheet? And if so, what do you put as characteristics on that spreadsheet?
All right, so I have a separate Word document that I put all my characters on. And I'll usually sometimes I write a little bio or a little description or information about that character, or a little dossier on the individual like that. So that character sheet, by the time the series is done, sometimes is 6, 7, 8 pages long between the character and all the factoids I put on there, as well as all the other details, different units, main things that I'm following. As for how do we come up with the characters, a lot of times I let my fans name them. People get to pick the names of the characters quite often. Other times I'll pick characters based on historical figures or people like that. Several of my characters are friends of mine that died in Iraq or died from suicide afterwards. And so I put their names in almost every one of my books, kind of as a way to kind of keep their memory and their thing kind of living on through. So their names are almost always in every one of my books. But that's kind of how I come up with most of my character names.
How about a James 1 question?
Yeah, there we go.
Your story will go down in history as the first one to officially feature the B-21 Raider bomber.
That's true. That's true.
Yes.
Damn.
Which is like, just beginning and stuff like that. So there's not much deep. Like, how do you predict, like, outside its appearance, like, what is it going to be capable of?
Yeah. So the beautiful part about the B-21 is we don't have a lot of capabilities. So right now, with what I put in there is I put in there that the B-21 it's not a hypersonic one for one. It's a subsonic bomber just like the B-2. However, because there are no specs there, I can make up whatever I want. So right now I've made it up as a hypersonic bomber that has a cruising speed of like Mach 1.2, 1.3, something like that. Can reach up to I think Mach 1.6 or 1.8 as a max speed. So we've gone ahead and said, we're gonna make this thing a supersonic bomber with a big range. So it's been fun to use because I think it's my own personal opinion. We probably have two to four of these things already built. and they're probably already out at the Nevada test range going through their paces and running through everything that they normally would, because we had the F-111 Nighthawk or F-117 Nighthawk was already operational in the 80s, well before it was in the Persian Gulf War. The B-2 was operational in the 80s as well, before it ever came online. You know, they were testing those things around. So my hunch is we probably already have one or two or more. And if we were in a war like we wrote immediately right now, it would probably be put into service. And it would probably be very limited, just like it is in the book, but it would be in service.
Yeah, a bit of a follow-up to that. Like, I noticed that with the recent images of the radar coming out, is like, how is this going to be different enough to justify it being separate from a B-2, which is the usual stealth bomber?
Well,
So yeah, you got a good point there.
So the big thing to remember about the B-21, what it is, you have to look at what it's replacing. So while we technically, I think we only have 18 B-2s, because we've lost 2 of them, and we didn't build the fleet that we said we were going to. So we don't have a lot of them, for one. The B-2 frame now, I believe, is coming up on 30 plus years old. And what they're looking to do is they're looking to phase out the B-1 bombers, the Lancers, with the B-21. And at the same time, they'll be phasing out the B-2. So the B-21 is going to replace 2 airframes, essentially. And unfortunately, we're going to keep that pig, the B-52, around for, I think, another 30 more years, which is insane, because that bomber is going to be damn near 100 years. It's going to be almost 100 years old by the time they retire it. And while we may need a heavy bomber like that, or a cruise missile platform like that, I think we should create a drone platform that can fulfill that role for substantially cheaper in maintenance costs and production costs. And then we can retire the B-52s. Because I really think that the way we should be going towards is drones. The one reason that the Air Force is held back from going all in on drones is because a drone needs to have an electronic transmission in control of it. And until we can develop a more autonomous system that you can program in a target and it receive no further communication and just go do its target, they're not going to go that way. And if it has to require a radio frequency to control it, then it can be jammed or it can be co-opted. And until they solve that technological problem, unfortunately, we'll never see the Air Force go all in on drones.
Dale Brown would have a few interesting ideas.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. But I'm starting to write more drones and stuff like that in all of our books, because I think that really is the future and where it needs to go. So,
Big Dog. Yeah, those like.
Yeah, Boston Dynamics. They have it right now. They're actually field testing that with the U.S. Marines right now in Afghanistan, the Army and the Marines in Afghanistan, because what they've been doing is, all right, so when you're a grunt, man, life sucks, because you got to carry, like I had to carry in Iraq, and I was just an interrogator, okay? I had to carry 77 pounds of body armor and bullets and water on me. That didn't even include a patrol pack or a rucksack if I had to go out with a unit. Thank God I was a FOBIT. People brought people to me, and I didn't have to go out very often. But those poor grunts in Afghanistan, they're having to hike up all those mountains with 77 pounds of body armor, weapons, and gear on, and then another 30, 40 pounds on a pack. So you're looking at 100, 110 pounds, and you're having to hike up these massive mountains. That destroys your knees and your back. And so Boston Dynamics has created that Big Dog where it can carry several hundred pounds of equipment for them. So they don't have to worry about that. They can just carry their rifle and their body armor in water and just go and do that and be ready to fight all the time and not have to worry about carrying all that equipment. So yeah, no, I think it's great. I love incorporating that stuff. I think the little micro drones, where those little micro killer drones we saw at the end of book 4, those are going to be coming into play a lot in the near future. I think that's going to be a scary, scary weapon to see on the battlefield. There's no way to defend against it. I mean, you can try and shoot the damn things, but you're talking about trying to shoot a drone the size, a drone probably the size of this, flying at you, and it hits a certain range and just blows up. So
yeah, it was just for a second. There was a real funny YouTube video that a guy voiced over the robots doing their thing.
Yeah.
And, whenever I think of Big Dog, I'd be like, haha, that guy. He is pretty foul mouthed, but that's what's funny. It's like, oh yeah, I can't wait to kill all these humans. Oh, a door. Hey Tommy, use your arm to. Oh, Devs, dude.
Open the door. Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, it's interesting. Like you saw that Boston Dynamics video where they got that drone that they were using to well, it was like carrying boxes and they were beating it and it was just demonstrating how it could fall and it could do this and that, right? And then they showed another one where it was shooting a handgun. It freaked everyone out. What people didn't realize is that was actually a what's called a deep fake. It actually wasn't real. That was fake.
Right.
They had engineered that and manipulated it to look real. So we've incorporated some of that stuff into our own books too with deep fakes, because deep fakes are going to be a huge problem in the 2020 election. It's going to be a real problem coming up.
Mm.
Yeah.
The guy actually did a voiceover for that one too. It's like, I got a box. Hey Todd, what's going on? Hey, what was that for? That sort of thing.
This guy, I have to look that up. That's going to be hilarious.
I'll share it on Messenger.
Nice. All right, so James T, what's your next question?
So as you know, I write too, and a lot of times I've been in the zone and just, you know, hammering away on the keyboard, and I'm writing this event as it's happened, and then all of a sudden, you know, I write something that I didn't intend to. It became a surprise for me, and I'm wondering, in your process, as you're hammering away and you're in the zone and you're really focused on this event that you're trying to, you know, paint for us in our brain, if you've ever wrote yourself into a situation where you went, holy crap, I just killed an important character, or something like that.
Yep, I've done that before. Gone, crap, what did I do? I got to kill this guy off now because unfortunately the way the story is written, they can't survive. That sucks. You got to either rewrite a big chunk of it, or you got to figure that you just killed the character you didn't want to kill.
So then follow-up question, give us one of those events where you surprised the crap out of yourself as you were writing. Give us a scene or an event in one of your books.
All right, so when I was writing Battlefield Ukraine, I had this sergeant that he was inside an apartment, and they're trying to eliminate a machine gun position. They're trying to kill all the guys inside there, and they go in there, and while they're in there fighting and stuff, there's another machine gun nest in another apartment on the opposite block. And I didn't account for the fact that if these guys were in there and this is all going on, those guys would have just opened fire across the way and just murdered them all with this 50 caliber machine gun. And I was like, crap, I can't do that. I would have literally just killed two of my top guys in book one. And they're supposed to survive to the end of the series. So I went back and I was like, okay, let me rewrite the scene. If we take out this dude first, this other guy comes in and uses his M203 grenade gun. He can fire it through the window, or through the living room, out the window, and hit that machine gun position. And that solved my problem. But it took me a little while to figure that out because I didn't realize I had just inadvertently killed them all until I'd written the whole scene. And I was like, damn it. I had to go all the way back and change the whole damn thing because I killed them. So sometimes you find a character who you just don't want to kill, and you got to do that. You got to go back and change it around, and that's frustrating. It's annoying, but it happens. So.
Okay, how about a Gary question?
Well, we got two more. We got two more new people that just joined up, so let's ask them real quick. So Wycliffe, can you hear us? Wave to us. Let us know you hear us. All right, what's your question? Since you just joined and you're kind of tail end here, let's catch you up with you real quick. Can you hear us? What's your question? All right, we'll go to Gary's question. I'll let you.
He writes, your futuristic books that we've talked about where you're 20 years in the future,
Yep.
where do you get the cutting edge technology that you include, or are you just dreaming it up out of your head?
Well, some of it I dream up out of my head. More of it is based on where I think technology in the military is going. So I don't know what it is, but I have one of these really, really good analytical minds for red selling things, where you war game how you would attack this, how you would handle this, where is technology going to go. So when I was at U.S. European Command, I worked in the J2 section, which is the Joint Intelligence section. One of the groups in my section was a group called Deep Futures. And their whole job and purpose was to look at how wars will be fought in 20 and 30 years from now, and what are the capabilities we're going to need to handle it. What is the new technology that's going to be integrated? What are we going to face? How are we going to deal with that? So I used to talk with them all the time about, what about this? What about that? How about this? Can't you integrate that? And I also read a lot. So I look at I read science fiction, and I look at some of that and say, well, why don't we have that now? Or what would be the impediment to us having this right now? And I say, all right, well, if we're talking about 20 or 30 years in the future, I really think some of these problems that we face right now that we think are insurmountable are going to be easily solved problems. And that's not going to be an issue. You know, for instance, 20 years ago, we never would have thought about, you know, what SpaceX has been able to do in the private space sector with reusable rockets. You know, they just launched a rocket yesterday, I think it was, out of the Cape. You know, it's only like an hour and a half for me. They launched another rocket up into space to disperse 50 small little satellites up there to, again, help with create a better global internet system. That rocket that they used, that was the 50th time that rocket had been shot off and used. That's incredible. And their ability to do that has revolutionized space travel and the space industry, because what it's going to allow us to do now is send up more materials up to the space station, but soon more materials into space to actually construct a ship in space that we can then use for deep space travel to the moon and to establish a base on the moon and then onto Mars. Because we can't build the ship we need to go to Mars from Earth. The energy resources used to get that bad boy out of the atmosphere into space is astronomical. Right. So if we can build it in modules and ship all those modules up to space, then you reassemble all the modules, you construct the ship up there like we did with the International Space Station, and then we can expand that out. So some of what I look at with the technology, like for the little killer drones, those things, some of that is here. It's just not integrated yet, or it's in the process of being integrated. Like the Air Force has these really cool little smart drones for basically using them for swarm tactics, drone swarm tactics. Because what they want to do is fire one of these cruise missiles at an enemy. Then the skin peels off. The next thing you know, there are 50 or 100 of these little drones that can only fly for maybe 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. And they have the electronic signature of a cruise missile. So now the enemy battle group or the air defense system we're attacking, say, on mainland China, now is looking at, has like hundreds of new targets. And it has to figure out what target's real, what target's a ghost. And while it's trying to figure out what target's real and what target's a ghost, the Air Force is hopefully dropping a couple of JDAMs or firing a real cruise missile in on the target. And so it's, spoofing. So a lot of that is cutting edge. It's not here yet, or it's only in development. But for our books, I just go ahead and put it in. That's how I come up with a lot of them. So it's interesting. So who else has another question? So we're coming up on our time here, I think.
Well, I got one more, unless Wycliffe has one.
No, I missed a lot, so I'd probably be repeating something that you guys have already discussed. So please go ahead.
Oh, perfect. No worries. Okay.
So I know one of the things that you've been thinking about is writing a science fiction series.
Yes.
I know you've been at work on that. Can you give us any insight into what that's going to be about, what your overarching theme is? Any clues at all?
Yeah, so this one takes place in 2090, 2090, 2095 timeframe, so it's not too far in the future. Basically, mankind is putting together a colony to go out to Alpha Centauri. You know, Earth is kind of working together, and they're going to do this. However, the Republic, which is America, it's now encompasses all of North America and the United Kingdom, has decided has got a probe that came from another system that said, "Hey, we found a perfect Goldilocks planet. It is exactly like Earth, identical in every respect. Only it's bigger landmass, and it's perfect. And it looks like there might be signs of life either past or possibly even present there." So we decide to not go with the rest of humanity to Alpha Centauri, and we go to this new Earth, this new planet to explore it. And when we get there, we discover that there is two races of beings on the planet. One is this very large looking alien creature, about 10 feet in stature, bluish looking. It's got four arms to it. Kind of looks like an avatar, like Avatar. Those characters from Avatar, like them, only they've got four arms to them. And then miraculously and unbeknownst to us, the other race of people we see there happens to look a hell of a lot like humans. And we're scratching our head going, how in the hell are humans here? So while our special forces guys are down there snooping around, they're listening to the languages, audio recording the languages, and they discover that these human characters are actually speaking an ancient dialect of Egyptian that dates back to 5,000 BC, back to Mesopotamia area. And now they're really puzzled, going, what in the heck? And so the series kind of evolves there when we try to make first contact with these new people, and first contact obviously ends up not going very well. And our special forces guys have to go in and kind of, settle the score and bail things out. And then the story just kind of escalates and goes from there. But we suddenly discover, a new adversary who wants to enslave humanity, that's already enslaved other people. And then we discover that there's not only humans on Earth, but there are now humans scattered on other planets, but we have no freaking clue how that happened. And we start to find out more of how that happened towards the end of book 2. Which can be super slick. I don't know if you guys ever played that game EVE Online before. I used to be really big into that back like 15 years ago. And so most of our ships are actually based off of ships from EVE Online. It's not a replica, but that's where we derived it. Some people are like, oh, it looks like Battlestar Galactica. No, it's nothing like Battlestar Galactica. It looks very much like EVE Online. Once you see the reference to it, you go, oh, that is exactly like that race's ships.
Very cool.
So, it's going to be a fun series. I'm already done with book 1 and 2. I'm a third of the way done with book 3. I'm hoping to bang those 3 out. Then I probably will pause. And one of the way I'm building the story arc is you have these 3 major powers. The Asian Alliance, the Greater European Union, and then you have the Republic. And that all happened because in the 2040s we had this massive world war that devastated the globe. Nuclear weapons were involved. We had AI, robots going rogue, and it just was a bloodbath. 10% of the population gets wiped out. So what I might do is when I finish the first 3 books, I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to do a 3-book series on that conflict that led to the formation of this republic and these other powers. So some of the characters that we're going to see in this first 3-book series, we will see younger versions of them in the other book. And then that will kind of tie that in, and then I'll resume the next 3 books in that, that sci-fi arc. And then somewhere in between there, I want to still write the Venezuela, Cuba series somewhere in between there as well. So if I could get a friggin' office, man, and some just dedicated alone time, I could probably do this better. Love my kids. Love my kids. Yeah. So now James had one more question, and then we're probably done.
Oh, okay. So, so one of the most interesting weapons in the current Falling Empire series that I didn't really expect, and the readers are really interested to find out, is the Arsenal ship.
Yep.
So, what was the thought and development behind such a mixed match of like an Arleigh Burke destroyer, World War II battleship, and a carrier?
Yeah, so, okay. So part of the challenge we have now is we have these things called carrier killers, these DF-24, ballistic missiles that the Chinese have been developing. And then the other challenge we have is it's actually cheaper to take a cargo ship and convert the cargo hold to hold cruise missiles, where you can pack in 300 to 500 cruise missiles in there and use that as a platform to attack an American strike group. So a strike group will probably have in the neighborhood of 900 to 1,300, standard missiles to be able to intercept cruise missiles being fired at, any ship missiles being fired at it. So you could overwhelm that. The Chinese could conceivably overwhelm it by having 5 or 6 transport cargo ships converted to be cruise missile platforms. So the carrier in reality is very quickly being negated as an actual weapon that we can use. Because if we were ever in a realistic war with China, the aircraft carrier probably would play very little role in that war. And the only reason I say that is because if that carrier gets within 1,000 miles of mainland China, it's in range of its anti-ship missiles, those DF-24s. So the question you have to ask, we live in a risk-averse society. If we were to send an aircraft carrier with 5,000 people in, and we manage to get nailed by 1 or 2 of those missiles, and we lose an aircraft carrier, and we lose thousands of people, what is the political ramifications of that going to be? As much as I would like to say Americans, well, half of Americans would say, let's go kick some ass and go, fight this war and continue to do it. We have a small segment of our population, maybe 10 or 15%, that'd be ready to surrender. And it's frustrating because they would not want to wage that kind of war that would be needed. So I said, how do we create an alternate weapon? And I came up with the Arsenal ship, because it's been talked about in past books. It's been talked about in the past as well, where we take a magnetic rail guns, we integrate those into a platform, a new weapon, a new ship, because the mag rails have an enormous range and a high cyclic firing rate that we could use. And then we would also integrate in a huge swath of anti-ship missiles, not anti-ship missiles, but land attack and anti-ship missiles that we could use. And then put in, because you have the F-35s are VTOL aircraft as well and short takeoffs, we can integrate some of them into the ship as a carrier as well. We don't need to have a lot. This ship doesn't need to have a 70 or 90 aircraft strike wing. It only needs to have a squadron, 16 to 18 aircraft, realistically. And the bulk of this firepower is going to be its land attack cruise missiles, its anti-ship missiles to defend the strike group, and then its aircraft for just close air support for the bundle. That's really the design for the Arsenal ships. So that's kind of what it came in with. We have already got, I think we've got at least 1 or 2 keels laid for 2 new super carriers. So I essentially said we just took those keels and repurposed them, made them for this. It worked for the book. I don't know if it would work in reality, but in an existential threat, I would like to think you could do it. I mean, yesterday, this is really funny. So General Motors is like, hey, we'll make 40,000 ventilators to help out with this coronavirus, right? And Ford and Tesla are like, yeah, we're all on board. So they're doing their stuff. Then yesterday, General Motors is like, we're not really gonna make 40,000. We're just gonna make 6,000. Oh, and by the way, you know how we said we were only gonna charge you, X dollars for it? We're gonna charge you double because we know you need it. And then President Trump said, really? All right, I gotcha. Picks up a phone, calls a few people, and General Motors is now owned by the United States government. And guess what they're making? Ventilators at the exact price that they agreed to in the first place. So in a wartime situation, I'm sure we could come together and we could crank out a lot of stuff that we need.
And I know a follow up to the Arsenal ship and railgun. Like the railgun technology is like the new big thing in the book, and probably real life as well. By the way, I got the reference with Admiral Ingalls.
Yep.
The ship.
Shipbuilders.
A guy named it after a shipbuilder. Well, I wonder what his destiny was. But
Yep.
yeah, so definitely. So seems like the railgun, like that's the new leap, I guess.
It is, but the interesting thing with the railgun, okay, so you can only fire, even though it fires flat and straight, you still have the curvature of the earth you have to deal with. So scientifically, you've got to figure that piece out. So that's why with the railgun, we actually had them develop turrets. And we had them develop the turrets at certain height levels. Because if we didn't have it at certain height levels, you couldn't shoot a flat trajectory round without landing in the water at some point. The other way you do it for the longer range ones is it's like artillery. You have to aim it up, and then you have to figure out the power demand needed to hurl the projectile, like to lob it essentially. So you can use a railgun and you can probably hit something 300, 400, 500 miles away, but you have to first figure out the trajectory that you're going to have to lob this thing. And then you've got to figure out the velocity it needs in order to have the energy to hit that. And then that determines how much juice you got to run through those magnets to throw out the projectiles. There's a whole lot of science involved in this stuff. But the big inhibitor to everything is power. So the Zumwalt class is supposed to have the power needed to do that. But I think if you were to take an aircraft carrier and you repurpose that and you use the nuclear reactors that are on that thing, you're going to have more than enough juice for a railgun.
Yeah. Given how far these things are supposed to fire, one has to wonder how much math is going to go into that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're going to have some serious computing power to crunch those numbers. But then you've also got to have a drone or an observer on the other end to adjust fire, because it's like any other artillery. When I was in artillery and we would call in rounds, our effective range, usually about 18 miles, 26 kilometers, give or take. I mean, it's further now, but we were in a 155 millimeter Paladin unit. So when we want to hit a target that's, say, 6 miles away, then we would put in a certain type of color powder bag, because that would have different measurements of powder, and it would tell us roughly how far the round would go. And if we wanted a really far out round, then we'd have to shove in the red bags, which were the higher powered bags, and you'd have to shove a whole bunch of them in to get the power to lob it out. So a railgun works like essentially on the same concept, only you're using electricity for the magnets and determining how fast these units have to activate to suck that round out the tube, essentially. It's a really interesting concept how the whole thing works. So Wycliffe's got a question. Go ahead, bud.
Yeah, if I may just cut in on the previous question. Since this arsenal ship has got enough power, so I'm sure directed energy weapons would also be a thing on that, right?
Yeah, they would. And actually in the arsenal ships, we do have some directed energy weapons used on there. I think we're using them more for anti-missile intercepts because like say a DF-24 ballistic missile's coming. That thing has a high arc, so it's arcing like a standard ballistic missile. So when it's in its arc, that's when it's vulnerable to a laser. Because what you do is you put the laser and that laser's got to actually sit on the missile for a certain amount of time, because what it's doing is it's superheating the fuel inside the missile and causing it to explode. Or if it's a solid state, it burns through to get. What's that? Or to fry, the guidance system.
The guidance system of the missile, right?
Yep,
so I guess
if it's a liquid fuel or if it's solid fuel, yeah.
Yeah, I guess we got to do that before the missile enters its terminal ballistic trajectory, right?
Yes, once you start on a downward trajectory, it's moving at Mach 25, and it is going to be really friggin' hard to hit because
really difficult to hit.
Yeah, and the other challenge is how do you get the gun to go straight up and continue to fire? That's why the carriers are so vulnerable to that type of missile, because when it's on its downward trajectory, they can't shoot it. They'll try to throw interceptors at it, but you're trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. And one of those bullets is traveling at Mach 25. So it's just very, very hard.
So James, I think another development in case of ship defense, carrier defense, is also the soft kill system. I think as the technology progresses, we'll be probably relying more and more on soft kill rather than hard killing incoming vampires. You know,
Yeah,
whether
probably.
they are cruise or ballistic, immaterial. But again, I think that's being countered by very high advances in inertial navigation systems, especially on the ballistic missiles, because those are pretty much unjammable. So there
Yeah.
it's more of a hard kill scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
definitely.
our Aegis ships are going Winchester sooner than they would have, in a similar engagement 10 years ago. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's always
that's really,
changing.
it's the cat and mouse game happening.
And the hard part now is actually the hypersonic missiles that the Russians and Chinese have been developing. Because see, the issue when the U.S. was part of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, we couldn't develop hypersonic missiles. But the Chinese were never part of that treaty. So the Chinese have been developing that for decades. It put us at a huge disadvantage because you can develop anti-ship missiles that travel Mach 4, Mach 6. Those are really freaking hard to hit. And they cover a lot of ground really fast. And you get hit with one of those, it doesn't have to be a very big warhead. The kinetic energy of that thing is going to cause an enormous amount of damage. So withdrawing from the treaties actually helped us because now we can develop those weapons and figure out a better defense for them. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. That's why naval warfare is going to be a very, very tricky landscape next 20, 30 years because there are some really tough weapons to have to defend against.
Oh yeah, and of course the satellites, because even though the Chinese may have the DF-21 and 24 anti-ship ballistic missiles, the question is today, do they really have the command control to target a moving carrier, something that goes 35 knots plus? Are they even going to be able to find it, fix it, and fry it? So,
well, yeah, that's a big one. But my concern is with, you're totally right on the satellites, but what if the Chinese are able to hack into our satellite feeds and use them? I mean,
or
why
use an
satellite
ASAT
feeds if you got a
weapon.
back door?
Yeah, they could even use an anti-satellite weapon, right?
Yeah, or ground lasers
like
to
a
just burn them
kinetic
out.
weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
So that'll be interesting. When the next war, the first hour of the next major war like that is pretty much just going to see a bunch of satellites getting zapped. And then it'll be a bunch of Internet of Thing attacks on the energy grids and communications and internet. It'll be an interesting cluster mess, that's for sure. So, all right. Well, we've been chatting for nearly an hour. We'll try to do some more of these while everyone's on quarantine. Give everyone something to talk about, think about, and just participate because we're all stuck. We might as well as try and take our minds off of being quarantined and all this good jazz. Besides, I think readers enjoy being able to ask authors questions, and I like being able to listen to you guys ask questions because it helps me create better book ideas and better scenes by hearing what you guys like and don't like and what you want to see more of, things like that. So.
Just a bit of a question in regards to like the timing of the meetings. Like, what time is it in the States right now?
It is 11:07 a.m. where I live.
Oh yeah.
What time is it for you?
1:07 in the morning.
Oh man! All right, time for you to go to get some sleep. So.
Yeah, but so if you can find a time that's most convenient for the majority of your readers, that's pretty good. So,
I'll try to see if we can't do something maybe 8 o'clock at night. Maybe that might be a better time. I think 8 a.m. Eastern time because I think it's better than you. I get a friend of mine who lives in Bali, and so I'm trying to deal with his time zone for this kind of stuff too. So.
Yeah. For me, it'll be Sunday morning, and so I'll be like, yeah, I won't have any urgency to wake up yet.
Yeah, no reason. Yeah, exactly. Works out. Yeah, maybe we do a Saturday at 8 o'clock or something like that. Fireside chats with James. There you go. All right. Well, I will chat with you all later. Thank you for taking the time to come on and ask your questions, and we'll talk again.